Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and this week we're going to be piloting a wonderfully spicy brew. This week we're going to be playing a Jeskai Squee's Invocation list. So, what is Squee's Invocation? Well, it's built around, one, the card Sunbird's Invocation, which is a card that I've been wanting to play around for a very, very long time, but I've never actually had the card being crafted, so I've always just shrugged it off until I actually naturally opened up a fair few of them, and today is that day. So, 6 mana for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. You may cast a card revealed this way without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, the idea behind this deck is that we're going to loop some pretty special cards. You may be familiar with Nexus of Fate. Nexus of Fate is a 7 mana instant speed, take an extra turn after this one spell, and then when it would be put into your graveyard, it goes into your deck instead, which means we have a constant stream of 7 mana spells in our deck. So one way that we can actually cast Nexus of Fate over Invocation, I should mention this is an infinite turn combination, so we're going to be thinning our deck with things like Pirate's Pillage, which 4 mana discards a card and allows us to draw 2 cards. We also get 2 tokens with this one as well, which ramps us straight up into the 7 mana for the turn 5 play, which is pretty cool. So we get down our Sunbird's Invocation, then we Nexus, and that's usually when we win. If we get to cast one of these with one of these in play, that's pretty much the game. So, as I was mentioning, Star of Extinction is another one of our 7 mana spells. It destroys a land, and it's also a board wipe as well, dealing 20 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. So, when we actually use Star of Extinction with Sunbird's Invocation off the top, it's going to look at the top 7 cards of our library and show us any spell with converted mana cost 7 or less that we can cast. Ideally, what we want to be finding is Nexus of Fate. So we'll wipe our opponent's board, we will destroy a land, and we will take an extra turn. Or we'll take an extra turn, we'll wipe our opponent's board, and we'll destroy a land. Whichever combination that ends up coming in. The thinner our deck becomes as well, the easier it is for Nexus to hit another star or star to hit another Nexus, and the more Sunbird's Invocations we also have in play, the more likely it is that that's going to happen as well. So, finally as well as another potential 7 mana spell, we have Expansion Explosion here. Expansion is usually quite castable in this deck as well. It's a potential win condition, but I also like to use it in the early game as well, just to make sure that our combo can go off effectively. So, 2 hybrid red and blue mana for copy an instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, the usual copies that we could have here are Pirate's Pillage, so that we can generate 4 mana. So it's basically a 6 mana draw 4, but you gain 4 treasures back, so it's like a 2 mana draw 4, which is pretty cool if you want to use it that way. Most of the time, though, we want to use the treasures to actually ramp, so something to keep in mind. But using expansion aggressively is pretty cool, as all the same. Same thing goes for things like Deafening Clarion. We can use that as a 5 mana deal 6 to each creature kind of thing, so not too bad there. And then Lava Coil as well. 8 damage to a creature or 4 divided as we choose. Either way, we can also use this one as well to counter a spell. It is a virtual counterspell in this deck, because most people are running Ionizes, Sinister Sabotages, Negates, and Disdainful Strokes. Expansion can copy all of those. If they do Disdainful Stroke, though, you can't counter the Disdainful Stroke, but something to keep in mind all the same. But the actual win-con side of it is actually Explosion over here. 2 blue, 2 red, and X. Instant speed. Explosion deals X damage to any target, and target player draws X cards. So, the converted mana cost on the stack is whatever that X cost is, plus all of the mana as well. So, if we make Explosion for X4, let's say, this is actually a converted mana cost 8 card. So, we actually get our equal to the 7 that we need on the Nexus of Fate. So, we don't have to fire this off for much in order to actually continue our combo off, but if we can get this off for like 7 cards or something like that, which is definitely capable of doing, then we can look very deep for our Nexus of Fate, guaranteeing pretty much that we're going to untap with that absurd number of cards in our hand as well, and if we lose from that point forward, we just deserve to lose, so, you know. In addition to that, the ways that we stay alive, as I mentioned, we do have Deafening Clarion over here. 3 damage to each creature is our way of surviving the early game against aggro lists as well. 3 damage pretty much takes care of most creatures in aggro decks. We also have Cleansing Nova as well. If anything doesn't get hit by that stuff, we can destroy all creatures for 5 mana, or we can destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Usually don't want to use the secondary ability all that often, because we do have invocations that it will hit, as well as treasure tokens and treasure maps. So the secondary ability, not always likely to be used, but if it does require using, say our opponent has Ixalan's Binding our Squee, and we have no expansions left, then that's one way that we get out of not losing the game. These two are our win conditions. Without them, we cannot win the game. So if we've lost all 3 of these, we have to somehow get out of that problem area. Don't use this deck to infinitely loop Nexus if you don't have a win con. Don't be that guy. But yes, if you have a win con and a way out, absolutely play to it. Anyway, in addition to other ramp spells, most of this deck is just ramp at the end of the day. We also have Treasure Map as well. 2 mana for an artifact. We can pay 1 to scry, put a landmark counter on it, and if we have 3 or more landmarks, you flip it over to Treasure Cove side here and generate 3 treasures. 3 treasures is ramp, usually gets us to the Star of Extinction or the Nexus Fate or Sunbird's Invocation, whichever one we actually need at the time. But we can also use those treasures as well to draw a card off of Treasure Cove. Fun little combination with Treasure Map and Pirate's Pillage. In addition to this drawing 2 cards, it's also going to generate us 2 treasures, and if we have Treasure Cove in play, that means this is a 4 mana draw 4 cards effectively if we don't need the ramp. So really cool stuff there as well. In order to defend ourselves, we also have 2 copies of Shivan Fire for the early game, hitting a Llanowar Elf or some early game aggro stuff in the case of mono red or red white. We can pretty much hit anything, and we can kick it for X4, 5 mana total. Does not the kicker does not count towards the invocation cost, by the way. It is not the converted mana cost, it's an additional cost, so something to keep in mind there. But it does allow us to take down Drakes as well, and a lot of stuff in that area of effect. Same goes for Lava Coil as well, really good against Golgari midrange. 2 mana deals 4 damage to a creature, and if it would die, we exile it instead, so their finalities become a little less effective. And finally, 2 copies of Negate, just for those control matchups, because we do need a little bit of help against the control, since we will be doing very little until the late game when we want to resolve our invocation, so we want to have something like a Negate backup if we can help it in those kind of situations. So game 1, this does struggle against control a little bit. Against aggro, not so much, because we have Clarions and we can actually easily ramp into Novas and Star of Extinctions. And mid-range is kind of a 50-50 split depending on the actual mid-range matchup. If it's Golgari, it can be a little bit difficult. Against the Golgari matchups, what you want to do is you want to hold off on your invocations and your Nexus of Fates or your Stars until you can cast both in the exact same turn, because of course they have Vivian Reeds and Vraskas and Assassin's Trophies. You don't really want to give your opponent the chance to hit your invocation before you get to cast anything off of it, because that's just the biggest feel-bad moment of all time. So use your Pirate's Pillages, your Treasure Maps to ramp up into a converted mana cost that is capable of casting both of these in the same turn, which against Golgari is perfectly reasonable, especially in games 2 and 3 once we bring in some sideboard tech. So, the actual way that we win, though, is most likely going to be Squee, because it is meme-tastic. The reason we're running Squee is mostly because the way we chain our Nexus of Fates is through a board wipe, so we can't really have a creature here that doesn't survive a board wipe. So we actually have to have Squee, because he can be cast from our graveyard or from exile. So if we do have to star into a Nexus at some point during the Squee attack phase, then we can actually just wipe happily without any issues whatsoever. So that's the reason we're running Squee as the win con. Also, we're taking infinite turns. We're pretty much killing everything that's not indestructible. If they do have something indestructible, then we have Explosion to win instead. So, yeah. And to the sideboard, let's go over to the sideboard. I like this viewing better for sideboard stuff. Anyway, against the aggro matchups, we actually get to bring in a few things. We've got the additional 2 copies of Shivan Fire for that early game stuff. We might also want to bring this in against mono green on occasion, because there are a lot of 2 damage targets to hit. Llanowar Elves, though, being the main one. You really want to take them off of that early game ramp if you can help it. We also have Lava Coil as well for the Golgari mid-range matchups and everything else, like our good old friend Drakes. So we have that. And finally, especially for Drakes, we have a copy of Justice Strike here. Target creature deals damage to itself equal to its power, so every Crackling Drake, Enigma Drake, is going to kill itself this way. And finally, we have our 4th copy of Deafening Clarion for that aggro matchup, just to make sure that we hit that stuff. So, aggro is covered with all of those cards. We also have a control package here as well. We have Disdainful Strokes for Teferis and other win-con related things. Counter target spell with converted mana cost 4 or greater. We can also bring this in against like mono green if they're bringing in big stuff like Nullhide Ferox and of that sort. 2 copies of Negate as well, which is probably the main counter spell against the control matchups, just to counter non-creature spells. Basically, we want to be countering Planeswalkers and counter spells, so Negate hits all of those things, and that's our 4th copy right there. And finally, just as a catch-all counter spell, we have 3 copies of Sinister Sabotage, 3 mana, 1 double blue to counter target spell. Gets to Surveil, so we get to look at the top card of our library. If we don't like it, we can put it into our graveyard, which is perfectly fine. If it's an Nexus of Fate, we'll just shuffle it right back in. So most of the stuff, we won't really mind about putting it into our graveyard at all. We don't really have any graveyard synergies, but at the same time, it's just nice to have all the same. Finally, 2 copies of Immortal Sun, and the reason we're running this is because of Golgari midrange. As I mentioned, if you're going up against Golgari, you do not want to play your Sunbird's Invocation down if they have the chance to Vivian Reed you or Vraska you. So what we want to be doing as well is putting down Immortal Sun. Just turns off all of those Planeswalkers that traditionally come in from maybe the side or even the main, just to take care of enchantments. We can shut those off right away. So 6 mana to do that, but also as an additional upside, we also get to draw an additional card each turn. All of our spells cost 1 less as well, so chaining together our stuff. The cost 1 less doesn't actually affect the Invocation's X spell, so something to keep in mind. It's still converted mana cost, so this is still 7 even if we're paying 6 for it. And of course, we also get creatures you control get +1/+1 until the end of the turn, which is largely irrelevant, though it does help us quickly finish the game off, I suppose, if you do have yourself a Squee. We can't mill ourselves possibly at all with Immortal Sun in play, because we do have Nexus of Fate, so we can just cast it if we draw it, so Immortal Sun's never going to mill, even if we do draw quite insanely with this deck. I have had situations where I've won the game with Squee because I have 4 Nexus of Fates as my final card in my deck, so you just loop Nexus as much as you need to make sure that you can just never lose. So anyway guys, that is going to be the deck. I hope you enjoy it. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video as well, where there'll be a link to the matches where you can watch this absolute meme-tastic fiesta in action. And as well, there's a deck list down below if you want to export this and play it yourself. I do highly recommend it. It's a ton of fun. It is kind of competitive. It's like tier 2, high tier 3, I would say. But it's certainly not a tier 1 list. It's mostly here for fun. But, I mean, we're running Sunbird's Invocation, so, you know, should be not surprising there at all. Anyway, guys, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.